I think we were the first company ever to do this. Like, it was interesting because it was a really hard sell at the time.
This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not investment, legal, or financial advice. Opinions are those of the host and guests and do not reflect any affiliated entities. Investing involves risk, and past performance is not indicative of future results. The host and guests may hold positions in discussed securities. Now, please enjoy the show. Konstantin, thank you so much for joining me today. Super excited to chat with you. All right, so you are the founder and CEO of Blockdaemon, which is a $3 billion+ blockchain infrastructure company that focuses on nodes, node management, staking, and other associated products. Previously, you worked for Deutsche Telekom, Nokia, and after that, you embarked on your entrepreneurial journey. You launched companies like AudioTube, Lookbooks, WireDrive, and you actually exited the company in 2017, which we'll dive into all that. But before digging into all that and your backgrounds, I would love to hear about how you grew up. When you grew up, were you a techie? Were you digging into computers and tinkering with things, or how did your interest in tech kind of evolve?
Yeah. Hey, thank you, Andrew, for having me. Really nice to be here. That's a good question. I grew up in Germany. And so my exposure to tech, and I'm a little older, so I'm like from the floppy disk sort of generation, Commodore 64s, words that probably don't mean a lot to you. But, and so just sort of when the internet came alive and modems came about. And so I think I had a very visceral experience with networks, right? And so that's my initial inception into the world of tech via telecommunications, right? And so I feel like I come from that generation where the invention of the internet was the thing in itself, right? And I think that's been really an important factor in my whole journey, is thinking through networks and how networks work, what are network effects, how do you build complex networks that can handle a lot of traffic, and what really started my journey also ultimately in crypto was cell networks, right? And so when I worked at Deutsche Telekom, I was assistant to the CEO and board members there, like this sort of a young high potential program that was quite fascinating in the late 90s, and then I transitioned to T-Mobile International, who at that time acquired all these UMTS licenses, so sending data through these cell towers for the first time. And so thinking about, kind of what software products can you actually sell and how does that work, right, is sort of the first technical problem I started to think about from a commercial perspective and strategic perspective. And so that's sort of kind of my journey through it, and so I also do feel as a German, I care a lot about governance. I care a lot about how to build open source systems that are balanced and ensure that there is not a single entity that can control the mechanism. My family ultimately was severely impacted by the war. I think I come from a generation where my parents were both born during the war, Second World War, which is nuts to think about. But I think growing up in Germany in the 80s, you had a more real experience of the possibility of war and destruction and East and West Germany. And so I kind of was pulled a little into the punky, anarchy world of things. And that was another sort of interest of mine. And so I feel like, and that took longer to manifest itself, but that was something I always studied and found really exciting. And so I kind of combined a sort of weird, say, Punkian anarchic interest in how to build consensus without institutions and cell towers. I don't know what that makes me, but that's kind of, I guess, the ingredients.
Makes you like the modern day cypherpunk, I suppose.
Probably. Yeah.
Very cool. So you mentioned the internet itself was a product or a thing that came to be, and that was before you were already digging into like the kind of the technical things. And this is going to be a stupid question, but what were you doing from a technical perspective, whether it be with computers or cell towers or whatnot, before the internet? Because, was there a lot of functionality with computers before the internet?
I mean, not really. I mean, you played games, right? That was it. Like an Atari was sort of it. And I mean, frankly, I was always more interested in the communication component of compute, right? And so I definitely wasn't somebody who spend a lot of time coding and building stuff. I was definitely somebody who plugged a lot of modems in, phone outlets and tried to communicate with people. And so I really was fascinated by that component more than anything.
So yeah, you said that you were interested in sending data through cellular networks and what products you could then sell to customers from that. Could you describe the early days of ideating that? Because nowadays it's like, for me, it's such a given that I'm like, I don't even understand how you would have to come up with an idea of what to sell people. But tell me about those early days.
Yeah, I mean, so there was a remarkable person I had the opportunity to witness in close proximity when I worked at Deutsche Telekom after I've spent a year sitting around in the headquarters pretending to be important as a sort of, in German, the word Vorstandsassistent, you're like assistant the board and stuff. I came across a man called Mika Sharora, who was a young guy, a little older than myself, but who came and worked at Deutsche Telekom to ultimately find ways to monetize the 50 billion that was spent on UMTS licenses. And so I only reference him because, he's a popular man these days because he became later on chief business officer at Google. He was president at SoftBank. He's CEO of Palo Alto Networks. He's one of the probably most esteemed CEOs and executives in technology. And that was kind of visible back then. And so meeting somebody, he was maybe 30, I was maybe 24. And so, you're kind of like, hey, this guy really was so excited about this. And you're like, hey, wow, I kind of want to work with this guy. And so that's how I started this. And, what was so fascinating, and I think what had so much similarities with crypto networks, was everything was sort of novel. And so there was no legal infrastructure for any of this. So you hired some young legal guys who were like, wow, we got to figure out how any of this work. And we started with like sending music through cell towers, basically, and ringtones and pictures and all this like questions of proprietary and protection and IP and then also how do you bill for this and how does that technically work and legally and so it was so fascinating because you kind of invented basically like a total new form of monetization from scratch, right? And that was also the only way where young people like us could actually do that, right? Like because there wasn't really any incumbents in this area. And so it was sort of weirdly exciting to kind of, I mean, it sounds so banal today, but like thinking about ringtones, and like, hey, what's a data package we can sneak through and what's the cost of this? And then SMS, and like, how does that work? And so it was just a exciting, complicated time that nobody understood and nobody had a rule book for, right? And so there wasn't really anywhere to look here. I think what I recognized at the time is that I enjoyed that chaotic commercial environment, meaning that there was room to be creative and to ideate. What I didn't enjoy is the corporate structure I resided in. I was also very young. I, at that point, moved to London, sort of in my mid-20s. And, you kind of sit in an office all day and it's a different time. You kind of work hard in a telco, basically. It's like working at AT&T, like it's not necessarily what you dream of, a young lad from Germany wanting to change the world, right? And so there's this sort of, at the time, also this sort of pull of like, is this meaningful? How am I going to add value to society here and all that stuff? And so it wasn't an easy time for me, but it was an invaluable time. I learned what I'm good at and what I'm not good at, and it was, at least in early stages, I realized I'm not a great employee. I was also fairly insecure at the time. I was pretty young. And so I kind of felt like what I always admire now when we hire young folks is the degree of confidence a lot of them have is so much higher than what I had at the time. I really had, language barriers and technical barriers to overcome. And so it took me a while to kind of feel like, hey, I can be confident in my thinking. But I think that insecurity was valuable because it kept me wanting to improve myself. And so I didn't give up. I kept on learning and reading and thinking I'm maybe not good enough. And so it sort of created a pattern of I need to do more. And I think that's something that has followed me through my life.
You mentioned the ringtones. You're like, yeah, it sounds kind of silly. We were trying to figure out how to sell these ringtones, but in the blockchain space, we're selling JPEGs of monkeys, and we're trying to figure all that out, and CryptoKitties and whatnot. So I can see some similarities there for sure. So at what stage did you decide to go from the corporate world into digging into your own startups, or kind of dabbling in, I don't know what came first, either the startups or blockchain, but which one came first, and what was that realization for you that you're like, okay, I don't want to actually be in the corporate world anymore. I want to go off on my own.
Yeah, my stint at T-Mobile was followed by a stint at the time, one of the great companies in the world, which was Nokia. I was very proud to join that company. And interestingly enough, like now in retrospect, it's so fascinating what a juggernaut that company was at the time, even compared to companies like Google and anyone else. Like, the people really thought, or Apple, that Nokia had the world at its feet with 1 billion mobile devices. And so I went there to help with really software strategy and deals, and spend a long time convincing them to acquire Spotify, which never happened. And I think that was, and I wasn't an important person in the company, but it was very obvious what needed to happen. And it's been so interesting to me to be in a large corporation where you think it's so clear where to go, and you kind of just can't get even remotely close to get that decision implemented through the multiple different gates and frameworks and decision makers that you need to get to.
But and sorry to cut you off, but why was it so obvious to you? I mean, that's not, but you're talking about the people that Nokia was the Apple of the day, and for them not to see how obvious it is, how were you able to identify that?
Well, I think because I've been working a lot at T-Mobile and distributing content on mobile devices via, through cell towers, I knew how hard it is to service content on a lot of different devices with different specs and software specs, and that it's important to have sort of widgets that you can put on devices that can be updated in widget, rather than create individual pieces of content per device, right? And so I think, and so the iPhone had that type of strategy, and it seemed like a really efficient one, because when I talked to developers at the time, because I was sort of on the ground, and said, hey, can you develop software for Nokia? They were kind of saying, dude, there's like 200 different Nokia devices with different screen sizes and things. And like, I have to make my content 200 times. With the iPhone, I do it once. And so it's just not a great experience. And so I was, so on the ground, you see the community of developers, and you're like, this is not going to work, guys. And then, but I think the higher ups at the time were like, we're so important. We have 1 billion devices. They're going to come around, and you're like, you don't understand how painful this is. And so I think there were just misconceptions there that were obvious if you were really on the ground, in the weeds. And then I think I met folks from Spotify very early, and obviously the sort of strategic math made sense. It's a Swedish company, Nokia was Finnish. I was really impressed with the technology, the way it could operate across any device as an app that was like fairly simple. Yeah, Nokia had a strategy of wanting to build their own music business, and I was like, why are we doing that? Like, this looks so slick and great. And back then, I mean, I don't want to listen. This is so long ago, I don't even remember numbers, but it probably would have been $50 million or something. Like, kind of, it was obviously, like, those were really kind of early stages, and you just couldn't get that done. And so there were a few experiences like that at Nokia for me, and I think that was my understanding, where I was like, I'm getting so frustrated, feeling I know better and not getting results, that the only conclusion for me was, I want to be in charge, right? I want to be an entrepreneur. And I also at that point felt more confident in knowing my strength. And I think what I'm really good at is understanding technology and technological trends well, on a pretty dynamic timeline, and also knowing how to execute against that, right? And so I had a couple of proof points there. And so out of Nokia, I met some folks during Nokia, and I kind of decided to kind of, venture out on my own and do start my entrepreneurial journey. And that was 15 years ago. And I've been a sort of gunslinger ever since,
That's awesome. Okay. So take me through the first startup or, company or project that you worked on after leaving the corporate world.
Yeah, I met a guy called Chris Blackwell. I don't often talk about this, but Chris Blackwell is the man. If you get to pick a life you want to live, pick his. Chris Blackwell is the founder of Island Records. He's the man who discovered Bob Marley, Bono, and U2. He's probably the most significant music producer on earth. His stepdad was Errol Flynn. He grew up in Goldeneye, the house that the James Bond novels made famous in Jamaica. It's just, you can't make this up, like a life just too fascinating to imagine. And I met him, and he owns a massive independent music catalog. And we talked a lot about how to build a transcoding engine to handle the complexity of having to send music files to all these different music streamers, Spotify, Rhapsody, Pandora, whatever else existed back in the day. And so we embarked on a venture together to address that problem. Yeah, a fascinating man, just the best. Like I just he's just so cool. Just somebody I really admired so much. And yeah, and so he is somebody, I think, who and I can't really. I mean, I don't even know if he remembers me. This is a guy who obviously is bigger than life. And but I think he likes talent and people who kind of are a little strange and stuff. And so he kind of was like, yeah, I like this guy, and like, let's do something. And so we embarked on a really complex problem, and it got really complicated very quickly with rights and everything and technology, and also the cap table. Like this was my first venture, and so I got involved in. So it was like a shell of a company there, and we kind of packaged it and had previous investors and put new money. It got really complex. And what was interesting for me is I didn't know a lot about how to structure a cap table and raise money. I knew a lot about how to build a product strategy and those type of things, but I really wasn't really able to structure a cap table for continuous fundraisers that I felt excited about. And so we kind of parted ways there, and I moved to New York. It did put something in my brain, which was that I really liked the concept of upload once, market everywhere, was sort of my entrepreneurial tagline, which is take pieces of content and transcode them to put them in a lot of different channels. And so, I worked with a friend who was a founder of Lookbooks and became CEO of that. And we started a photo transcoding engine and marketplace. And that's
What year was that?
I think that was 2012.
Okay.
And then the same with video. And the last company got acquired in early 2017. Yeah. And so at that point, I feel I was a lot more confident about how to build software companies, how to talk to investors, how to raise money, how to make deals. I was a little older at that point. Kind of was like, had some money, made money. And so I was already deeply in love with crypto and Bitcoin. My love for crypto and Bitcoin started, I'd say 2013, maybe, while working at Lookbooks. One of the co-founders and CTO at Lookbooks is a young man called Adam Helfgott, who was a dear friend of mine and a great technologist. We always loved anything a little subversive and curious. And so he, made me buy my first Bitcoin in 2013. And, we got really interested in that whole community. And back then, like everything was a little smaller. Everything was very project-based. There weren't jobs, anything, barely companies really, So you kind of just sort of flittered around and worked on side projects. In 2015, I had some more structural engagements with like some early stage crypto companies as advisor, and like was at meetups, was networking, went to the first like consensus conferences and Bitcoin conferences and stuff. I started to work with younger CEOs that I could coach. I felt like that's a good place of my time because I had some experience back then, and it was a sort of underserved niche. And then, I worked with, I met David Bailey, who owns Bitcoin Magazine. I met him really early on. His wife actually was somebody who worked with me at a company that I eventually ended up buying. And, God, I met them 10 years ago. So we're young, and so David and I collaborated on a few projects. We did the proof of existence protocol together. And so, so I was active in the space for sure, and knew that that's what I want to do next. And so when I had entrepreneurial freedom to do a new company, I knew already it's going to be in crypto. And so that was 2017. And, I had a good network, good experience, a decent understanding, I'd say, of the market. And basically also knew that I'm a serious B2B software builder and wanted to build something not with a token angle. And so fairly strategically looked at like tokens are going to be really big. They're important, and we can talk about that. They're an important part of crypto. They're not the most exciting part for me around crypto, but I knew that they're going to drive a lot of attention into crypto. And so for all these people wanting to launch tokens, to interact with tokens, these people need nodes, And so when we did a token together, David and I, Poet, when we had to run an Ethereum node, and it just was really difficult to keep the node in sync. And so it was like very clear, like we had an auction at the time, the node went offline all the time, every time in 2016, 2017, when people had ICOs, basically, they took 5 days because the node spun out, and you were like, hey, there's really no tooling, there's nothing you can do here. And that was really the genesis block of Blockdaemon. Was like, you know what, let me build a tooling company that helps people in running blockchain infrastructure, but do it ultimately with an angle for institutions. So at institutional scale and grade, meaning built by people who normally build technology for, and this sounds terrible, like an IBM or something. So from the get-go, heavily certified with backup systems, redundancies, like just in a way that I didn't see the crypto community build at all, right? And so that was the starting idea for Blockdaemon.
So how do you have the foresight for that? Because 16 and 17, I don't think anyone was really talking about institutions. And you're right, running a Ethereum node was a complete pain. But there was no conversation really. People would say, oh, in theory, in the future, banks and whatnot are going to use blockchain, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, for you to start a company, and also Ethereum being kind of, one of the few chains that had activity that, used nodes in any sort of major way. How did you think, okay, there's going to be a lot of tokens, there's going to be a lot of nodes, and institutions are coming? Those three things were very non-obvious back then. At least for me. Maybe for you, it was a no-brainer. But
I mean, listen, I made assumptions, and I felt because I had firsthand experience of seeing how difficult it is and how bad the underlying infrastructure actually is. And I saw the volume of activity at the time and institutional interest when Bitcoin hit 10K and stuff, where it was like the interest compared to actual state of tech is totally not in sync. And so I just looked at that delta and was like, hey, you know what? It looks like there's a lot more value on the speculative side being created that can be technically realized. And so it just was like, there seems to be an opportunity here. And so and then obviously, I looked at the market and saw there's nothing there. And I felt, and then, I went back to my time at telcos when telcos, the mobile phone companies, cell towers make the money, right? And so I was thinking of nodes as cell towers, right? I was like, if this works, then the cell towers are the nodes and they're going to accrue a lot of value. And so my assumption was that crypto is a thing. What are the areas that are going to accrue value? And then where is an opening? And so it was a fairly simple exercise. So, I got lucky. I don't know if it was intelligent, but I had enough data to make an educated bet. And I had enough resources at the time at my disposal and an aptitude for risk. I had kids and a wife, and I put all our money into a new company. That was definitely something where I'm like, wow, it's crazy that I did that. But I did, and turns out that that was the right decision. And I don't know how or well, touch wood, so far. But yeah, so you don't know, like it's really a mix of perfect circumstances. Like I just had this unique viewpoint into the industry with the people I was surrounded with. I had capital and freedom at the right moment in time. I had access to the right people on the engineering side to work with me. And so it all came together basically. And I like risk, and so I think and also one of my, maybe the two main characteristics that help me that I possess are I have a very low threshold for enthusiasm when I learn something, and I'm very resilient. And so like I get really excited fast when I learn something, and then I'm really excited, and then I really hold on to it. And so I think that was really what Blockdaemon was. And you're right. I think we were the first company ever to do this. Like it was interesting because it was a really hard sell at the time. Not a lot of people, most people were like, why would anyone ever outsource nodes or buy a node? Like seems totally stupid. I didn't find a lot of, people that were in on it, basically, right? It wasn't a popular project at the time. And I definitely, people were not excited about it for sure.
And also, what was your thesis around the institutions? Because 2018, I felt like, 2017, 2016, we were saying, in theory, in the future, institutions, banks, et cetera, will be using this technology. 2018, it felt like, that was the era of enterprise blockchain and whatnot. And there was a big kind of trend there, or at least conversations around that. So that made a lot of sense then. But pre that, what was your thesis around the actual adoption of blockchains or distributed systems from these corporates and banks and whatnot?
Yeah, I mean, I always say like with Bitcoin, it's a little bit of, when you believe in something, you also have to create a reality in which that belief can live. And so it was a little bit like I really wanted Bitcoin to succeed. And so I was like, for Bitcoin to live over time, I felt it needed institutions to adopt it. And if I want that to happen, I need to build tools that allows institutions to interact with it. And so that was sort of a little bit like my belief in it. But I like supporting belief, and so I kind of feel an important factor is, when I talked about early on, my fascination with new forms of governance and decentralized systems where there isn't a single entity controlling things coming from Germany. I found that resonated really strongly in me in Bitcoin. And I wanted to create also this financial system that can live where that does not occur, where there isn't a centralized entity. And so I just became ideologically passionate about it as well, which means even if I don't see it, but I want to believe it, right? And so I do the things in order to make that a reality. And so, I mean, there's another way to frame it, which is, and I have an investor, Sam Lesson, who from Slow Ventures, and he's a journalist at The Information, and he once, I think he wrote about the sort of inherent stupidity of the founder. Says it's a lot nicer and better than I ever can. But there's this inherent conflict of like, you need to be a little stupid and crazy because obviously you're coming to a conclusion about a set of facts that a lot of rational people disagree with you on. And you will need to look at that and be like, I disregard all these intelligent people who are probably mostly smarter than me and believe that I know better, And so there is this weird pathological disorder there where you can't be too smart as a founder because then you're never going to do anything,
Yeah, no, that's so true. I mean, there's a lot of power in being naive. If you're enthusiastic and have resilience, then you can make stuff happen. So you did mention before that you believe tokens are extremely powerful tools and technology, but you purposely set out to build a company that does not necessarily utilize tokens. There's no native token with your company. What was the thought process around that? If you were so confident in tokens, but yet you didn't want to launch one yourself, what was that decision?
Well, so it's important to understand why tokens exist in cryptographic networks and open source communities, which is ultimately to reward open source contributors to maintain and improve a network. And so it serves a very important purpose. And the speculative nature of it is really in order to ensure that there's always sufficient short-term interest, ultimately by developers and people, to improve the network. It's one of the great conflicts of crypto is that the inherent conflict of the short-term nature of the speculation and the real long-term goal of what crypto intends to do, which is ultimately replace a whole global financial infrastructure and putting money on the internet basically, and give control of that money back to the individual away from the banks, right? And so the custodial component here is really, really important. But we need the short-term token speculation so people engage with it, because replacing the underlying financial infrastructure is so complicated. And the financial institutions have such a moat in this world that without hitting the greed button, we're never going to be able to replace them. The speculative nature of tokens is the greed button. It is ultimately what enables us to build these solutions over the long time. And it's ultimately, basically in a weird way, kind of like a Trojan horse the institutions are going to eat, because there's so much money to be made that they will adopt this technology. Without it, it'll be living in total parallel to the existing infrastructure and would probably never find mass adoption. And so I think tokenization is a very important psychological tool to keep developers involved, to create hype, so people engage and start interacting with it. And ultimately, software eats all and crypto eats all, and it's an important vehicle to shepherd through that change that we want. But I obviously don't want to fall victim to the short-term nature of the token. Now, listen, lots has changed. Part of our product is also staking, and we make revenue in tokens. And so we're part of that short-term cycle, even if I want to or not. But in principle, I wanted to be married to the long-term vision of crypto.
Beautifully said. I think, was that thesis formulated before, or was that before you actually launched, or was it after or during, or, because, just that thought process is very, very well, kind of played out here.
I mean, I don't know if I formulated it that way, but I mean, it definitely, I think a lot of people in crypto know that. At least the early day folks understand that. Like that was a big factor. And I think, but messages dilute and go places over time, right? And so it's been now, 16 years of crypto. And so, it's worth reiterating this message. And it's something I've tried to also do in the last election cycle with politicians, and reminding people of the true long-term nature of crypto. That's actually very inclusive, very democratic, very important, and couldn't be more removed from the speculative short-term stuff that people really get caught up in. That serves a purpose, but it's actually not the goal, right? And so, it's definitely something that we've thought about. Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay. So early days when you were first launching, how'd you build out your team? And it was just focused on nodes. So I guess, what was how are you building out your team? And, what was your primary focus in the business sense of, hey, we're going to operate these nodes for companies and we're going to charge a flat US dollar fee and they'll pay with a credit card, or, tell me about the very, very first, let's call it 6 months or so.
Yeah. I took an engineer who worked with me at a previous 2 companies prior, who was a very talented all-rounder, and worked with him on a prototype. We actually made the decision, which was an important one, to join an accelerator. The reason why that was a tough decision for me is because at that point, I feel, I was a pretty mature entrepreneur. I felt like I can teach these kids something. I don't need to be taught. But I wanted to create a framework for me to be really motivated to keep on pitching the business in 3 minutes. And I felt like an accelerator is a really good way to do that, even though I felt I don't need help by somebody explaining to me how to sell to an institution and blah, blah. Like there's a certain inherent arrogance that can be really in your way. But so I wanted, and I also know how easy it is to drop a good idea early, because I have a lot of opportunities, right? I think about entrepreneurial stuff all the time, and people come to you with opportunities. And so when you have a good idea, you got to really nest it, and make sure that it's a little bit the beginning of burning the boats, right? Like where it's just like, I want to make sure I don't drop this good idea by somebody coming to me and offering me an amazing opportunity or lots of money to do something else. And so I was like, you know what, I have, an engineering partner. We have a really good plan. I'm going to take a little bit of money from outside next to my money, so I feel a little obliged, and join a program that keeps me on a certain schedule to deliver. So I can't sort of pussyfoot around, so to speak, And so that was a really important part in turning Blockdaemon into a real reality for me. And in during this accelerator, we got to also pitch our product to a lot of companies like HP and stuff. And we talked to a lot of engineers there, and luckily enough, one of the engineers we spoke to at one of those large tech companies linked in me after the conversation and said, "Hey, I kind of really like what you're doing. Would you be, I'd like to join you guys." And so sort of very organically, sort of we picked up engineers, and which is obviously a massive testament to us. I don't want to say it that way, but like to the idea at the time, and I think our maturity that we were able to do that, and because it, the first few engineers are really, really important, and having self-motivated engineers who come from experienced backgrounds who are like, "Hey, I kind of want to do that," is really important, right? Because they come with enthusiasm and ideas. They don't come with, "Hey, I'm a Silicon Valley CS grad. Like, how much options am I going to get? And maybe I make some paper here." They come like, that's often not the right motivation. And so I feel like we found the first group of engineers there. We found a really great Bitcoin core dev in a meetup that I had to pay in cash, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago, but like who never could take payroll, like a total cyberpunk. And so, we kind of cobbled together ultimately an engineering group. And that was the team basically. We built the first prototype and, futzled around. And, in early 2018, decided to raise a round, and decided to not raise from crypto natives. And so, I knew a lot of people in the space. I was like, I want to look really distinctly different. So I raised money from Comcast and Boltstart. Both investors are still the only other board members of Blockdaemon. We were the first crypto investment both funds have ever done. And that was, those were very experienced SaaS B2B investors who really, have a track record of being long-term investors, working with mature founders. And so I really liked that. And they came in. We did we got a little check from Apollo. Like we had some interesting little small funds come in. People like Sam Lesson came in at that point. We met, and so we had an interesting group of people, and we did a small round, and with that I brought in ultimately the team that worked with me at my previous company, which at that point in time it was a year since I sold my last company, and so they all had they had to stay for a year after we sold the last business. So it was like March 2017, and this was like March 2018. And so, and then I brought over like a dozen or so of them. And yeah, the rest is history, and I think a big success factor is having obviously a group of people that have worked together, right? And so each other, what you're capable of. You're a janky little pirate boat, but you know exactly what you can take, what you can deliver. And I think early on, that's really, really important. I remember talking to a founder who was like, "Oh, I'm hiring engineers," and he was like constantly turning engineers down because he was like, "Oh, we just have I only hire like Google Plus type. Like, it needs to be the best engineers and stuff." And I was always wondering, like, about to me early on, you need the best engineers in the team that work together, like having the best ICs. I don't know. I mean, it's not my experience, at least. Like, nothing I think is more valuable than having 5 guys who know how to work together really well, ideate in a room and build shit, like, and they don't have to be all fucking PhDs in CS, like that's hasn't been my experience. And so we've kind of had that, and that was really how we started. And then those guys kept on recruiting like-minded engineers ultimately. And that's how maybe the first 15 people, 20 people came about. We hit crypto winter though. And so that was the first big snack in this story.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of directions we can go here, but yeah, actually, okay. Tell me about the fundraising, because, you mentioned there was those funds. They were the first funds. There was the first crypto investments for those funds, which is pretty incredible. I imagine you kind of said a similar pitch that you were saying earlier, how it's, hey, these nodes are similar to telecom. That probably resonated with them a lot. But tell me about, how were you able to land these non-crypto natives at that early stage?
I think at that time, crypto was in a hype cycle. And so I think, I really took advantage of that. I think a lot of people were looking, and I just fit the bill of like, the guy has gray hair. He worked at normal companies, no fedoras, and that was it. Frankly, I mean, like, it's probably the truth. And then I think it's track record, right? And so you build a relationship and they get to know you, but listen, I mean, we had to raise again in 2019, and that was a lot harder, right? And so, I mean, I had to cover payroll. Like, I didn't take a salary for the first couple of years of the company, all those type of things. And it was a really hard process, keeping the company afloat and operating in a nearly dead market, basically. We were lucky enough to find the next group of investors, which was a mix of crypto native investors like Coin Fund and Lira Hippo in New York, who really weren't crypto investors at all, but had some really great people there who believed in our story and backed us at a time when nobody else did. Like, I had a choice to sell the business for next to nothing. It's kind of funny, but people, like, I had offers for, I don't know, like, I think $15 million for Blockdaemon at the time. And like, I was like, hey, that's not too bad for a year of work, and like, and near bankruptcy basically. And so I was like, oh, and luckily, I was like, just too good, and the team was great, and I was like, I really believe in this, and I'm going to keep this going. And but it was interesting to see, because I had competitors at the time, and that was another thing. The competitor landscape of Blockdaemon looked different every year. And these people just vanished, and at that point, a lot of folks sold for very little money, who were maybe ahead of us, who could have been where we are. And they just checked out. It's scary. Like, when you're like, hey, I have 2 months left in the bank, no investors, somebody gives me a little money, we're going to fucking pack up here, And so I feel like not dying and just keeping going is often the right thing, can be the wrong thing, So you don't know, but we made it through it, and and then we're finally scaling, and then had an Aaron term sheet, and then COVID hit, and that got pulled, and we were back to the drawing board, and I had to really redo all those things, cover payroll, don't take money, all this type of stuff, and put enormous pressure on my personal life, but we got through it and found some investors to help us. And then suddenly the market turned and everything went bananas.
So yeah, no, the 2018 crypto winter, that was an absolutely brutal one. During that period of time, or I guess from your launch, how was the product suite evolving? Because were you thinking in 2018, okay, maybe we're doing nodes, but we should add more functionality, over here, or add more products over here in order to keep lights on? Or, how is the product evolving over time?
Yeah, I was always thinking about the product from the context of the story of the sad little ETH. And so the sad little ETH is the story of the fees and value a token creates in its life cycle if it moves through the crypto ecosystem regularly, which means a token gets acquired. It gets minted, let's say, or created. It gets acquired or earned, And when it gets acquired, a fee is generated. There may be 2 fees even, a transaction fee and a gas fee. An API call is made, a US dollar fee is created. And then when it's moved to a wallet, another API call is created and a fee is generated. And then when it's moved onto a node for staking, suddenly it earns a staking fee. And then when it's on and off ramped into a dollar, a fee is generated. And so when it's moved into custody, a fee is generated. And so I looked at it, the life cycle commercially from that angle, right? So I was like looking at like, what's actually the value, the lifetime value of a token in circulation? And at what points does the token fall something off the token, right? And what institutional product can I build that double dips as much as possible in it? And so I'm a big proponent of revenue flywheels. And so I like multiple of these models, right? So if I take the assumption that I make money when a node schedules a transaction, so something gets moved somewhere. So okay, so it gets probably moved into a wallet. And then when it sits in a wallet, the wallet generates a fee. And then in the wallet, it might get staked or it might stay there for a bit. And then it might get moved and sold, for example. And that is again going to a node. And then so I just followed those lines and looked at the different products that you would need in order to have a cup underneath it and which ones would fit into a single stack. And that's sort of the product vision of Blockdaemon, basically, right? And so, and that was basically nodes, and nodes can be for transaction scheduling and data, and those are MRR USD, and so those are APIs and full nodes. But then you have staking is earning rewards and liquid staking models around it, and there's APIs there around reporting, and also for nodes there's gas abstraction add-ons. And then you have key management and wallet solutions that ultimately combine it all and bring it together. And so that was sort of always or that was my goal, to build a portal and platform for institutions to serve as a gateway to combine all these solutions in one. And so that's what we built.
Yeah. So today it's MPC wallets, vaults, nodes, APIs, staking. Yeah. So it's a kind of the full lifetime, life cycle of these assets. Do you see areas where you'll be evolving to in the future? I mean, restaking, for example, it's kind of a newer thing that's happened over the past few years. But do you see there's going to be continual evolution here, or are you like, no, this is kind of the primary, this is the primary foundation that we've built so far?
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's always evolution, right? Like I have to say, like crypto is so innovative. And yeah, I mean, I think anything that relates to movements of tokens, we'll be thinking about it. And restaking is something we do. We're part of EigenLayer, for example, and stuff. I think the question is more, is it institutionally possible from a regulatory perspective? I think that's more the questions around restaking. I do have concerns about the viability of the networks when it comes to restaking and stuff. And so I think it requires thought there. Staking is a complex bucket, really. And we try to, where we've been usually disadvantaged in staking compared to probably competitors, where we're the only actually US-based operator of staking infrastructure, basically outside of an exchange, right? And so we had to adhere a lot more to rules than maybe other people. And so we've been very careful how we interact. And so we're a pure white label provider. We only serve institutions. We don't do anything. We support projects and stuff. But yeah, we've been very, very careful there. But yeah, we run enormous volume, obviously, for institutions. I think one of the things that this stack has allowed us to do is it created probably, and this, take it as hyperbolic startup CEO talk, but out of the top 500 institutions in the world active in crypto, probably 65 to 70% are customers of Blockdaemon. Wow. And I think that's a pretty unique statistic because, it's hard to find a company in crypto that isn't a customer of one of our services. Because on some of them, we're really competitive. And so nodes, obviously we were the first, like we're one of the big providers of nodes in the world. Like that's just been our bread and butter. We're a really big provider in staking. and also on MPC on-prem wallets. We're a really big provider, and so we have certain verticals where, if there's an RFP out there in the world, like we'll get an invite, and so it's just the whole strategy is to kind of mix it all together, but we sell these individually, right? And so I think what makes Blockdaemon unique is that we just have this super dense customer profile ranging from, publicly, some is public, like JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs and Bank of New York and the PayPals and Robinhoods and eToros and Googles and Microsofts and Amazons and Coinbase, Binance, Kraken and Anchorage, BitGo, like they all use components of what we offer. And so because we are uniquely institutional and we're uniquely US based, and so for certain institutions, that's fairly compelling. I think we were the first staking company to have audited financials. We started in 2020. And we're also the only company in crypto, as far as I'm aware, that has 3 of the top 10 financial institutions as with major shareholder denomination, which is Citi, Goldman, and JP Morgan. And so we always try to look really sort of legit and transparent and combine our sort of strong technical ability with also the sort of smell of institutional viability. And so I feel like we have a really good position here, but we're not doing anything crazy, right? And so that has other consequences, like we're not buying crazy tokens, we're not like trading, we're not like doing any of those things,
How do you guys decide to integrate a new protocol? Because there's constantly, new L1s, new things happening every day, it seems like. So, how are you deciding to make the effort to go through that integration, whether it be nodes or staking or, other things like that?
Yeah, it's a very difficult process, frankly, and we're constantly changing it up. I think it depends also on the time in the market. When you have to be very OpEx focused, we're a lot more careful about supporting protocols. It depends on their life cycle. And so we have really 2 lenses to look at protocols. There's the new protocols, and then there's growing existing protocols across our product suite, right? And so if you think of a protocol's life cycle, there's testnet, mainnet, and so that's normally full nodes, validators. Then once they're mainnet, over time, you want to API them and add them into abstraction layers. That comes normally a little later because once the minute something goes live, it might not need to be part of a ubiquitous API. So we have an API product for transaction scheduling. I think it has like 27 protocols behind an abstraction layer. I think it's the most abstracted API in the industry. And so for us to add a protocol into that is a costly decision because it has to be pretty tweaked in order to look the same like everyone else. That's different than just putting up a node, for example. And so, it's a different math per product line. We're sometimes it's just like for staking, hey, what's Andreessen Horowitz doing? Do we need to run a testnet node and see if there's going to be volume here? It feels a lot more investy. We haven't been fantastic at it because we've been careful. So normally we go a little later. Commercially, that sets us a little back, but it means that we're always very clean. We run tokens we support past Goldman Sachs. Like we try to really make sure that there's no shenanigans in networks. We're also qualitative, a little more responsible. We don't support protocols we feel are technically not entirely safe. And so I'd say a lot of our competitors don't have that inhibition. And so, it's something we need to think about, obviously, over time. Now that the regulatory landscape has shifted, I think, that might change.
Yeah. Speaking of this shifting regulatory environment, well, TBD, but, the new administration is pretty way more pro crypto than the previous. You guys have opened up offices in many countries. Is that part of this push to kind of get all the institutions globally on board and whatnot? Or what is kind of the thought process behind, hey, let's expand outside the States and get our name and kind of be in front of these institutions everywhere from Abu Dhabi to London, et cetera?
Yeah, partly it was we got to get out of the US, right? And so I think that was a really hard and clear sentiment towards the middle of 2022. end of 2022. And we, I can't overstate how bad the US market was in 23, specifically. I think I would say the TAM for crypto companies in the US probably fell 80% or something. And lots of American companies went bankrupt. Probably, like it's just been drastic. And I think you can't overstate it, actually, how bad it was. And so it was clear that as a larger entity, we had to make up for also the loss of growth that we had in a previously large market elsewhere, right? And so we just recalibrated. We had a big office in LA. We closed that. We moved a lot of people to Singapore, for example. And so that's definitely a consequence of the regulatory and market, as well as the plan of wanting to be early. And the beauty of software is that you can, in theory, operate fairly globally. What we learned, unfortunately, in crypto is that you do need people on the ground for legal reasons. You might need nodes and data centers locally also if you want to operate. And so it's a tricky situation. But yeah, we're very, very global for a smallish company, 180 people or so. We have customers in around 50 countries and probably offices in 10 or so.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, 180 employees. That's really impressive. I thought it was more, because I mean, you guys are 3 billion plus. But hiring, how did you start with hiring? Would you consider yourself, you went into building this company as someone who could hire effectively? And how has that skill evolved over time? Have you gotten significantly better? Is it always challenging, or is there a certain method that you follow?
It's a good question. I think I'm a good hirer early and small stage with people I actually work with. Have had learnings and shortcomings once we were we were larger ones, like over 200 people, where a lot of people do the hiring, and you try to meet as many people as you can, but often I'm, ultimately not the decision maker. I meet somebody for 30 minutes. Like, I'm not going to overrule a team leader who's excited about someone because I'm like, I don't like the face of this guy. But I think I learned that I'm not a good hirer based on interviews. I'm a much better hire based on experience working with someone. So the people that tend to do really well at Blockdaemon are people that are internally promoted. And so, interestingly enough, I think I've been a lot better and more effective there in pinpointing people internally and growing them. And it's been harder for me to find people externally and put them in the company, specifically on the senior level, and have them thrive. That's not unusual. I think the success rate is actually quite slow in larger startups, like 50% or something, which is surprising. But crypto is also very specific. But I feel like as a company, we've evolved a lot in our process, and we've gotten a lot better in hiring, for sure. It's an absolute vital skill, and one that I spent a lot of time on curating, talking about, thinking about, and also really working with really important mentors on evolving my skill set. It's kind of also fun to know what I'm not good at. I do think I have really good strengths in certain areas, and then there's areas where I'm not so good at. I'm not somebody who, I think, micromanages, or I expect people to do certain things, and then that's that. And but sometimes I'm not very quick with holding folks accountable around specific metrics. I just sort of expect results over time. And there's learnings there, I can be more explicit around the metric and reiterate that more and stuff. And so you change your style a little bit. And and so there's more to do here. And I think I'm lucky enough that I think I don't have a lot of ego here. I always tell my team, hey, if anyone has a better CEO in mind, introduce me. Happy to hire him, her, them. I feel like that's I wouldn't have a problem with that. I'm really vested in Blockdaemon to be successful. I really value the company, the stakeholders in the company, our customers, and we have a culture of putting the company first, and that's definitely what I do.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So going off that, how would the people that you work with describe your operating style? You kind of mentioned you expect people to get things done. You're not a heavy micromanager. Would people describe you as laissez-faire, or how would they describe your management style?
I think they would probably say that I trend that I do the right things over time. I think they would say that I have a good view of the market and the long-term strategy of the company. I think that I'm non-erratic and good communicator. I think sometimes they might wish more decisiveness around resolving certain issues that I sometimes let linger because I want people to let them figure it out. I think they would describe me as being very loyal. I really learned to value the people that have been with me for a long time, and I feel like it's invaluable. Like knowing people, trusting people that you've worked with and taking care of them is the biggest asset in a company, I find, as a CEO. Yeah, I think, obviously, I'm sure I have a bunch of weaknesses. Kind of hard to say, like I definitely feel there's stuff I don't like. I don't like one-on-ones. I don't like performance reviews. I don't like maybe all the normal MBA-ish CEO stuff bores me a little bit. Like I'm kind of like, I don't need this. Like we can have a meeting with everyone in the room and I'll tell them what we're doing. And I'm trying to get people to solve problems for me, not solve problems for people and like stuff like that, And so I'm sure there's stuff that some folks find difficult. But I feel like I have enough people that have been with me since multiple companies that there must be something that they at least appreciate.
How do you expect your company is going to evolve for the next, we'll call it, 4 years during this next administration that is more pro crypto than the previous one?
Listen, I mean, the general feeling for us is that we have it all on the table, right? And so we obviously have a unique institutional footprint. I've mentioned the unique nature of our customer cohort. We've been really constrained by regulation in the US and the general TAM of the market that was really held back by by adoption of staking, by allowing institutions to custody crypto assets. Like all the software we sell ultimately is for institutions who want to custody assets, earn yield on assets, offer assets to their customers. And so our feeling is that the administration will allow this new cohort of customers to offer crypto and engage in crypto in a way that will make our product the perfect solution for them. And so our assumption is that our TAM is going to tenfold in the next 24 months, right? And so we feel we have the perfect product suite for company like when SAP 21 fell, for those type of scenarios, right? And so we sell technology to institutions who want to custody crypto, and so who want to interact with crypto, want to earn rewards to crypto, want to offer their consumers wallets, who want to all that type of stuff. And so there's always going to be a combination of doing it themselves, of outsourcing it. And so I feel like we just have an enormous opportunity there. Also, I think my hope is that as one of the few US-based companies, that we will benefit from it because we've been really penalized for not leaving the US. As a company and as a headquarter, and I live in California. I pay my taxes. The company has been here, and we've thought about it, and we said, listen, we're a US-based company. Our investors are from here. We got debanked. We had like a lot of things thrown at us, and I'm really hoping that we can now take advantage of that as well. And so having a strong presence here in the US and a history in the US and understanding the regulatory infrastructure and having relationships here hopefully will help us to also drive the dialogue forward in ultimately building the infrastructure we need to get the next billion people onto crypto rails. And so I think the expectations are very high. I think it's going to be a great challenge because expectations are so high. It's easier not to die than to thrive. And so now we need to thrive. There's really no excuses. We have the customer base, we have the cash, we have the team. And so it's really on us to ultimately be one of the delivery mechanisms for the next step we want crypto to take in the US. And so, yeah, I'm really excited about it, I have to say.
You don't have to answer this, but should we expect an IPO soon? Maybe this year, maybe next year? Is that coming?
For sure not this year.
Okay.
Listen, providing liquidity to stakeholders is important at this stage of the company. We raised a lot of money. People made a lot of sacrifices. So it's definitely something that I think about. There's a lot of different ways to do it. I think new ways are possible, also via tokens. I don't want to say that we're never going to do a token at this point. If it becomes a viable legal framework in the US, it's something we could also consider. But the best way to create exit liquidity is to be the most beautiful person at the party. And that's what we intend to do. We know what we need to look like from a legal standpoint, financial standpoint, product and customer standpoint. And so that's what we're going to aim for. And then we're going to create the reality we need to create for our stakeholders.
All right, last question before the closing questions. Does AI impact your business at all? I know AI has been, talk of the town, but how does that impact Blockdaemon?
Yeah, for sure. Listen, AI and crypto, I think, are interwoven, right? AI is the big centralizer and crypto is the big decentralizer. So I think there's a sort of technical marriage that is important for both. And so they're stack-wise interwoven. We use endless amount of AI tools internally, obviously. I think AI agents and wallets are a really, really important product and conversations. And it's obviously something we're taking a close look at. And so, yeah, there's lots of overlap there.
Awesome. All right. Time for the closing questions.
Sure.
How do you get the name Blockdaemon?
Yeah. There's a book called Daemon. It's also one of the books Vitalik references. It's a little older, about an AI that actually goes, a decentralized AI that goes nuclear on the world. And Daemon, and so that kind of put an idea in my head. And Daemon in computer science means operating system that runs silently in the background. That's always what Blockdaemon wanted to be. We wanted to be the largest crypto company you never heard of. Sometimes that's not the best strategy. And so I'm trying to be a little more public and talk more about who we are. And so we're changing that a little bit, but that's how the name came about.
Very cool. All right. If you go back in time, let's say, 10, 20 years before the start of your whole entrepreneurial journey, you can give yourself one piece of advice. What would that be?
I think a lot of the initial thing that came to my head, don't be so scared. I feel like there was a lot of fear going into my entrepreneurial journey. And I think a lot of anxieties that were unnecessary. I think good intentions and a good attitude will take you a long way. It sounds weird, but I feel like I sweated a lot. And now, obviously, it's also easy for me to say now. Obviously, a lot of that anxiety was unwarranted.
Awesome. All right. What trend do you think is totally overhyped, and what trend do you think is underhyped?
Oh, overhyped.
It could be anything.
Yeah. I think overhyped. Actually, currently, some of the AI-related stuff, specifically, even DeepSeek is probably overhyped. And so I think there's probably more to it than what it looks like. And I think underhyped, Ethereum.
Oh, very cool, man. I wish we had. I want to dive into that, but I know we're ending time here. But all right, what is your proudest accomplishment and why?
My children. Listen, nothing beats having kids.
That's true. It's funny. I used to always hear that in podcasts. And I was like, man, everyone says that. It's so typical, And then I had kids, and I was like, oh, okay. I know, make total sense. Awesome. All right, sir. Konstantin, thank you so much, man. This was incredible. Where can people find you? Where can people find out and learn more about Blockdaemon?
Yeah, blockdaemon.com. I'm on Twitter, Konstantin11. Hit me up. And look forward to hearing from folks.
Amazing. Thank you.
Take care, man.